Before we dive into these scary stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy true horror content every week. Let's get into it. Working at an amusement park wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most of my shifts involved mindless tasks, sweeping up popcorn, restocking soda machines, and occasionally manning the Ferris wheel. The highlight of the job was swapping ghost stories with coworkers during breaks. The most famous one was the employee-only tunnel beneath the park. The story went that the tunnels were built decades ago to let staff move supplies without clogging the walkways. But after a fire destroyed part of the park, they were abandoned, left to rot beneath the surface. People said the tunnels were haunted by workers who'd died in the fire, though most of us brushed it off as nonsense. Then, one quiet Tuesday night, my supervisor, Mike, asked me to grab supplies from the storage room down there. "Take the tunnel, it's faster," he said casually, tossing me a flashlight. His tone was nonchalant, but something in his eyes told me he was serious. I hesitated. "Can't someone else? Everyone else has gone home," he interrupted, his voice flat. I didn't argue. The entrance to the tunnel was behind the bumper cars, hidden behind a rusty door with peeling employees-only lettering. The hinges screeched as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow concrete hallway stretching deep into darkness. A single bulb flickered weakly above the entrance. I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me. The air was damp and cold. My flashlight beam wavered as I scanned the space. The walls were lined with old pipes, some of which dripped steadily onto the cracked floor. It was eerily quiet except for the occasional drip of water. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine and focused on my task. About 5 minutes in, the tunnel didn't seem so bad. It was just an old hallway, nothing sinister. But as I rounded a corner, I heard something faint. A low hum like machinery running far off in the distance. "Must be the generators," I muttered to myself, though I wasn't convinced. Then I saw the first door. It was an old, rusted thing. Its paint was chipping off in flakes. A metal sign hung crookedly, but the words were too faded to read. I tugged on the handle out of curiosity, but it wouldn't budge. It had probably been locked for years. Shrugging, I moved on. The hum grew louder, and my unease deepened. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded rhythmic. I quickened my pace, determined to get to the storage room and get out. The next corner brought me to another door, but this one was slightly open. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. Inside was a small utility room filled with broken equipment and old uniforms hanging limply from hooks. The uniforms looked ancient, with the park's outdated logo stitched onto the faded fabric. Then I saw the handprint. It was smeared on the wall near the door, dark and oily, as if someone had pressed their palm against the concrete. My throat tightened as I stared at it. It was fresh. "Okay, nope," I whispered, stepping back into the hallway. That's when I heard it. A faint laugh echoed from somewhere behind me. It was high-pitched, childlike, and completely out of place. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Seconds later, the laugh came again, closer this time. My chest tightened as I began walking faster. I wanted to get the stuff from the storage room and get the hell out of there. The storage room had to be close. I kept moving, trying to ignore the growing sense that I wasn't alone. As I rounded the next corner, my flashlight flickered again. The tunnel seemed darker now. That's when I saw it. Just a flash at the edge of my vision. A person. But when I looked again, it was gone. "Hello?" I called again, but my voice cracked this time. No answer. I walked forward slowly, every muscle in my body tense. The figure had been there, I was sure of it. But as I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just the same cracked concrete and dripping pipes. Then, I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. The flashlight slipped from my sweaty hand and dropped on the ground. The light beam flickered wildly as the flashlight hit the floor. For a split second, I thought I saw a face laughing at me from the darkness. I had enough. I grabbed the flashlight and ran. I didn't care about the supplies anymore. All I wanted was to get out of that tunnel. My footsteps thundered in the empty tunnel, but no matter how fast I ran, the hallway seemed to go on forever. That's when I heard it again. The laugh. And this time it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I didn't dare look back. I sprinted until my lungs burned. The sound of the laugh was still chasing me. When I finally saw the exit door up ahead, relief flooded through me. I shoved it open, bursting into the cool night. For a moment I just stood there, gasping for breath. The amusement park was silent now. When I turned back toward the tunnel door, it was slightly open. And standing just beyond the threshold was the same person I saw before. It wasn't human. Its proportions were wrong, its head cocked at a strange angle. And its face. It was laughing. The door slammed shut on its own, and I didn't want to stick around any longer. When I told Mike what happened, he just gave me a grim look. "You saw him, didn't you? What are you talking about?" He sighed. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Just don't go back down there." I didn't need to be told twice. I was never one to shy away from the crowds at amusement parks. The sights, the sounds, the chaos. It was all part of the fun. But this time, something was different. I could feel it in the air as soon as I stepped through the gates of the park. The usual excitement was missing, replaced by an odd unease that I couldn't shake. It was a Friday evening, and the sun was just starting to dip below the horizon. The sky was tinged with purple and orange, casting this beautiful light over the park. Families were laughing, children were shouting in joy as they raced between rides, and the vendors were peddling candy, popcorn, and all the usual park fare. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just the fatigue from a long work week. But as I stood there, taking in the sights, my eyes kept returning to something strange. A clown. I first noticed him from across the park, standing near the Ferris wheel. He was dressed in the typical circus-style attire, bright red wig, garish makeup, a yellow and purple outfit. Nothing out of the ordinary for an amusement park. But there was something wrong about him. The way he was standing there, unmoving in the middle of the crowd. He didn't smile. He didn't interact with anyone. He just watched. I tried to shrug it off. Clowns were part of the park's charm, right? But then I realized he was staring directly at me. I turned my head quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. I wasn't some scared child who'd get spooked by a performer. But as I continued through the park, something strange started to happen. I'd glance over my shoulder, and there he was again, always at the edge of the crowd, just out of my direct line of sight, watching me. I wasn't sure if it was the park's atmosphere or just my imagination, but I started feeling like I was being followed. I kept walking past the roller coasters and carousel, trying to lose myself in the noise and lights. But the feeling didn't go away. The hair on the back of my neck prickled and my skin felt tight. Every time I turned, the clown was closer. At one point, I made a sharp turn into a small alley near a food stand, hoping to get away from the growing sense of unease. When I looked behind me, I was relieved to see no sign of him. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. It was just some bored park worker messing with me, I told myself. Nothing more. But then I heard something. Faint at first, a soft squeak of shoes against the pavement. Then it was louder, unmistakable. Someone was walking behind me. I turned around quickly. There he was, the clown, standing right behind me, no more than a foot away. He didn't make a sound. He didn't smile. He just stood there, his eyes locked on mine. I froze. My mouth went dry and I took a step back. This was too much. I knew I had to get out of there. Fast. But as I turned to leave, something strange happened. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me. No one was following. I looked back over my shoulder. The clown was gone. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe he'd been just another performer, part of the show. Or perhaps it was some sick trick, a part of an attraction. but the lingering feeling didn't fade. It wasn't just a trick. It was something wrong. I started walking quickly, trying to blend in with the crowd, but the unease stayed with me. I couldn't shake the thought of him. The clown. No one else seemed to notice him, though. He didn't stand out in the park. No one seemed to acknowledge his presence. But I was certain I wasn't imagining it. I'd seen his eyes, the dark emptiness in them, the way his gaze never wavered from me. Eventually, I found myself near the Ferris wheel again, the place where I'd first seen him. And there he was, standing just outside the ride, this time even closer than before. He wasn't watching the people on the ride. He was watching me. I tried to convince myself that I should call it a night, go home, but my feet moved against my will. Something was pulling me toward him, even as I desperately wanted to turn around and leave. When I reached the base of the Ferris wheel, I stopped in my tracks. The clown wasn't alone anymore. Behind him, just at the edge of the shadows, was another figure. A woman, but her face was so obscured by darkness that I couldn't make out her features. She was standing completely still, just like the clown, watching me. For a split second, I thought I saw her smile. But it wasn't a smile that made you feel safe. It was twisted and evil. And I realized then that no one else could see her either. No one seemed to notice anything unusual about the clown or the woman standing in the shadows. I turned away. My legs were weak. I was shaking, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensation that I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I wasn't alone. The people around me moved in a blur, laughing, chatting, like nothing was out of the ordinary. In the reflection of a nearby ride's mirrored surface, I saw him again. The clown. He was directly behind me, so close that I could almost feel his breath on the back of my neck. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. My body refused to move. The clown reached out, his hand inches away from my shoulder. But just before he touched me, I heard something strange. Laughter. Soft at first, but then it grew louder. It wasn't just the clown. The woman in the shadows was there, now laughing. It was a sound that scraped at your bones. A laugh full of something dark. My eyes darted around, but no one else seemed to hear it. And then, for a brief moment, everything went silent. The park, the crowd, the lights. They all vanished, leaving me standing alone in darkness. The clown stepped closer, his face inches from mine. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Before I could scream, the world snapped back. The park was loud again, the crowds bustling, the lights flashing. And the clown, he was gone. But I wasn't the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something inside me had broken, and that whatever I had just encountered wasn't done with me yet. As I ran back to the exit, trying to make sense of everything, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. There was something wrong with my eyes, dark, hollow, just like his. As I sat in my car ready to go home, everything seemed normal again. I looked in my rear window mirror, my eyes were normal again. To this day, I'm not sure if it was real or if I imagined all of it, but the experience traumatized me, and I will never be able to go to amusement parks or look at clowns again without thinking about the terrifying encounter I had that night. Working at Sunspire Amusement Park was supposed to be an easy gig, just a summer job to keep me busy until college. I'd heard all the jokes about creepy amusement parks and urban legends, but I shrugged them off. I didn't believe in that kind of stuff. At least I didn't before that night. It started on my third shift. I was manning the Ferris wheel during a slow evening, barely paying attention to anything except the countdown until closing. Then I noticed him. A man in a faded old-school uniform standing just outside the ride's entrance. The uniform didn't match what any of us wore, and something about him made me nervous. He wasn't looking at me directly, but his presence felt weird, like he was watching me from the corner of his eye. "Need something, sir?" I called out. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows near the cotton candy stand. I didn't think more of it at the time and continued doing my job, When my shift ended, I mentioned it to one of my coworkers, Jill, during cleanup. She frowned. "You probably saw one of the custodians. They've been here forever. Don't worry about it." But her voice had an edge of uncertainty that I didn't miss. A few nights later, I saw him again. This time, he was standing near the carousel, still as a statue. It was almost closing time, and no one else was around. My stomach knotted, but I told myself it was no big deal. Just another custodian, or maybe even a manager. But as I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered, and I swear I saw his face. It was white as paper and wrong. His eyes looked empty, like they weren't really there. I blinked, and he was gone. Jill wasn't at work the next day, so I asked another coworker, Greg, about the man. Greg seemed shocked when I described him. "You shouldn't have gone near him," he muttered. "What are you talking about?" Greg hesitated before finally explaining. Years ago, before the park's renovation, there'd been an accident during a late-night shift. An employee had been working solo when he fell from the Ferris wheel. His body wasn't found until the next morning. Some said he'd been pushed. "Every now and then," Greg whispered, "people see him. But he's not alive." I laughed it off at first. Greg loved scaring new employees. But as the days went on, I couldn't stop thinking about what Greg said. What if he wasn't joking? It would make sense that he was telling the truth from what I've seen so far. That Friday night, I was assigned to close up the Ferris wheel. The park was emptying out, and the air felt unnaturally still. As I checked the ride's safety locks, I caught a glimpse of him again, standing at the bottom of the wheel. This time I didn't hesitate. "Hey, who are you?" I yelled. I climbed down quickly, but by the time I reached the ground, he was gone. I was about to turn back when I noticed something lying where he'd stood. A rusted name tag with faded letters spelling out Charlie. My breath caught. Charlie was the name of the man who'd fallen. Suddenly, the Ferris wheel started to creak, and its lights flickering even though I'd shut it down. Seconds later, the cars began to move. Then I heard it. A faint voice whispering my name. I ran, leaving everything behind. From that night on, I told my manager I only wanted day shifts, which he, weirdly enough, didn't have anything to say about. I still work there, but I haven't seen the ghost figure since.